Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Good to have you with us. Fun Friday for us. It's Jeff Sentell on UGA Recruiting. The possibility that Georgia could be on commit watch here this weekend. We'll let Jeff tell us more about that, how it could be an even more fun Mother's Day for many of us, or Mother's Day weekend. Also, speaking of recruits that Georgia already has, soon to arrive, running back Nate Frazier. We've talked a lot about him lately because one of the things that I think makes it fun for Georgia this summer is adding a few more potential playmakers into the mix. What are Frazier's thoughts fresh ahead of his arrival at UGA? We'll let him tell us about that on the program today there as well. But off the top of the program, I want to talk to you a little bit about Jaden Rashada. Kirby Smart did speak about Rashada for the first time here this week at the Regions Tradition, that's the celebrity golf event that he did. And at that event, Kirby Smart gave you a couple of words here, and we're going to kind of expand on that a little bit and talk about what the pursuit of Rashada kind of demonstrates about Georgia. So all of that is on the way. We are glad to have you with us. Now, I'm also going to give you a little inside baseball here for a moment. When I say what I'm about to say, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to walk over, I'm going to get the football helmet, because I did notice our DawgNation Daily football helmet is not on the desk here right now. We want to make sure we do that. So when I sit back down, you'll have seen me do all of that, and sometimes that's just sort of the way that it goes around here. So want to give you a heads up about that, and then we're going to have a fun show in store for all of you. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I think some of you have an idea this is probably true, and it is. There's a little bit of a difference, I would say, between doing this show during the season and doing this show during the off season. Like during the season, one of the challenges we have is, how do you just get it all in, right? There's so much going on. You're trying to cram a bunch in. You don't want to do too much. You want to give people more than they can handle. But that's kind of the challenge is there's a lot to say and only a limited amount of time to say it. In the offseason, just to be completely honest, and hopefully I have a reputation for honesty, in the offseason, it's a little bit different where sometimes you have a little bit more room to sort of stretch out. You have a little bit more room to dive deep on some topics. And you're sort of looking at a situation of, okay, what is interesting to talk about today? And as I mentioned, I think it was yesterday, sometimes we'll go a good, few weeks, maybe even a month, and we won't really hear much from Georgia coach Kirby Smart. And so therefore, when we do hear from Kirby, it ends up being a pretty big deal. And I would say yesterday it's kind of an example of sometimes what we do during the offseason. We'll take what is maybe a short quote or a small number of words, and we'll try to expand on that and see what's interesting about that. And today is another kind of example of that, too, that Kirby Smart made a brief appearance with the media when he was at the golf tournament here this week, spoke to the print guys a little bit, spoke to the radio show, Mac and Cube here a little bit. Small number of words, but since we've got the space to sort of dive deep on some of this, I do think there is some interesting things to expand upon based on what Kirby Smart said. And one of the things that made Smart's appearance with the media here this week pretty interesting is, for the very first time since Jaden Rashada came to Georgia, Kirby Smart went kind of, you may say, on the record about Rashada. Now, once again, this is like the shortest quote in the history of quotes, but that doesn't mean that in this very, very short quote, there isn't something kind of interesting to take away from that. I want to show you a story that Connor Riley wrote at DawgNation.com that featured the quote from Kirby from Birmingham when, I'll just read it to you here. Connor writes, when Kirby Smart spoke about Jaden Rashada ahead of the Regions Tradition golf tournament on Wednesday, the Georgia coach kept his explanation for bringing Rashada short and simple. Here's the quote. He says, well, we have 3, so we want to always have 4 quarterbacks. That's what Kirby Smart says. That's the goal, and we're excited to have him. Once again, that's a very short quote from Kirby Smart on Jaden Rashada. Now, here's one of the things we know. That is sort of classic Kirby Smart from the standpoint that he's sort of playing defense there. The defensive-minded coach is sort of playing defense there against anything that's sort of too interesting, too salacious. Of course, Kirby doesn't want to talk too much about Rashada, making too big of a deal about a quarterback right now that's just a backup. He doesn't want to do anything that sort of, rocks the boat or creates attention. That's clearly a subject that he wants to sidestep. But even in the attempt to sort of not make it interesting, I would say to me, it still comes across as a little bit interesting, because what Kirby says, if we take him at face value, is that Rashada is here to essentially satisfy a number quota. We wanted 4 quarterbacks, now we have them, and it's kind of as simple as that. But if that's what's currently true for Rashada, then that is a far cry from what Rashada once was, where, we were hearing all these stories about Florida was trying to raise $12 million to essentially buy him away from Miami. Ultimately couldn't do it, so Rashada ends up at Arizona State. He's starting there as a true freshman prior to getting injured. At one point in time, he's like the most well-known bonus baby of the young NIL age. And now, if you hear Kirby Smart say it, he's just the 4th quarterback on the roster here at UGA. Now, the truth is that Rashada was probably never quite the prospect that was worth the amount of money that was being thrown around by a collective I don't even think that exists anymore there in Gainesville, nor is he nothing more than just the number 4 quarterback at Georgia. Not quite as notorious as that one story would have led you to believe, and maybe not quite as sort of unremarkable as the current narrative might lead you to believe. Probably Jaden Rashada as a player is somewhere in the middle of all of that at least, and we'll find out more over the course of the next couple of years here at UGA. But even still, even if the exaggerated NIL stuff was never quite real, and he's obviously much more than just one of 4 quarterbacks on a Georgia roster here right now, the fact of the matter is that there is a different conversation being had around him than there was before. He is here to contribute depth for right now in the hopes of competing for a starting quarterback job a little bit later on. And the fact that Georgia was able to convince him to do that when he almost certainly could have been a starter somewhere else, well, that is pretty amazing. And I do believe it speaks to kind of a secret of success for the Georgia Bulldogs. And I want to talk more here for a moment about exactly how it is that Kirby Smart's able to do this, exactly how it is that Georgia as a program is able to do this, convince a guy, you could be a star somewhere else, you could be the starting quarterback somewhere else and all the spoils of victory that come along with that, or you could come here now and be a backup. And maybe one day in a future year, you could be the starting quarterback. That we would assume is not the easiest sales pitch to put out sometimes. So how does Georgia do it? Well, here is where I want to go to something else that Kirby Smart said this week. Now, as I mentioned to you a moment ago, let me give you proper context for this. We played you a couple of clips yesterday that were only about 10 seconds long. We typically like our clips to be about 30 seconds. That just sort of is how things kind of flow best. We played you a couple of clips yesterday that were only about 10 seconds long. Now, why was Kirby talking about the offense and, kind of some new stuff they may be doing? Why was that only 10 seconds long? Well, because Kirby Smart really doesn't want to talk too much about that this time of year. He's there to play golf. He's not there to talk about his offense. And we played you a clip about Kirby wanting to talk about or should say being asked about the defense, what they're trying to get better at. And once again, it's like, 10 seconds long. There's not much to it. But the clip we're about to play for you here is not exactly a TED Talk, but it is a slightly longer clip, which to me would sort of believe this is something that Kirby was sort of feeling in the moment a little bit more. Not all that jazz about talking about his offensive game plan right now because he's trying to enjoy a day of golf. None of that geared up to talk about being better against the run because there's all kinds of time in the fall to talk more about that. But when he talked about this particular topic, and as I see it, I think it kind of relates to Jaden Rashada, there is just a little bit more energy in Kirby Smart's voice. He was asked, what were your big ambitions during the offseason? What are you hoping to get done? And Kirby did give you a little bit more on this than some of the stuff we gave you yesterday. This is once again from the Mac and Cube show. Kirby talking about the value that he and his program see and what he calls the 2s and 3s, the second and the third string players at Georgia, how Kirby and the staff work to make them better, but perhaps even more important than that, how they work to keep them happy in the Georgia program. This is not the longest clip ever, a little bit longer than the stuff from yesterday, but it's fascinating. And when it's over, I'm going to explain to you how it relates to Rashada. Take a listen to Kirby Smart from the Mac and Cube show.
Well, the biggest thing is getting our players better. We're trying to grow our depth, and we spend a lot of time on our 2s and 3s throughout spring practice. We kind of say if you've played over 500 snaps, we see you as a returning starter, and we got quite a few guys that fit that mold. And the deal was, can we build up the rest of our roster? You know, how do we retain them? How do we sell that you might be a 2 now, but you're closer to going to the NFL draft from here as a 2 than you are at our neighbor school as a 1. And the development piece is probably what we sell the most.
First of all, do you get the point that I'm making? You can sort of tell when Kirby's sort of into a topic. Yesterday, hey, tell me about your offense. Tell me about your defense. Kirby Smart does not want to talk about that right now. He's not going to give you 5 words on that, and he barely did. Talking about Jaden Rashada, Kirby, how long was that quote? Like 6 words? Like, Kirby does not want to talk about that. I would say the clip you just heard sort of sounds like, even on a day when Kirby's there to play golf, he's sort of into talking about that a little bit. That's something he kind of feels in his heart a little bit, that, hey, getting our backups better and keeping them happy in the program is something we really try to put our back in here this offseason and really try to put our best effort towards doing. You can just sort of tell Kirby kind of feels that a little bit more. And even though Kirby's sort of talking about the program at large, I do think this sort of relates back to what we were saying a moment ago about Jaden Rashada. How do you convince a former NIL superhero to come to Georgia and be the 4th quarterback, because Georgia needs a 4th quarterback, and be a backup this year and maybe a chance to start sometime in the future? How do you do that? How do you do that? Not an easy thing to do, but Georgia has successfully done that in a lot of different position groups. I think Kirby Smart, in the clip you just heard, explains how that gets done. Because they've been able to convince players, and I believe this is true. You can't convince players of this unless it's likely true. In this case, it likely is. You could go so-and-so and be a starter, be the guy on the field all the time, or you could come here and be a backup. This is why it's better to be a backup here than a starter somewhere else. And right now, the gap between the very best college teams and the sort of middle of the pack or the next group below, whatever else, in my mind, it's never been wider. It's never been larger. And one of the ways in which that's demonstrated is the fact that being a backup at Georgia is now better than being a starter somewhere else. And the reason why, as Kirby Smart said, is that you may not be starting, but your pathway to the NFL, because of the development you get here, is so much clearer than it is for so-and-so player at, middle of the pack state U that is going to be lucky to get you the league. We know we can get guys to the league at any position, and we know that we can, put you in the NFL. And so, therefore, you may not be a starter as listed on the depth chart, but your path to the NFL is just as clear as it would be if you were. That's why it's better to be a backup here than perhaps a starter somewhere else. And that, I believe, to a certain extent, is the secret to Georgia's success, is they're able to convince players of this, and they have the track record that proves that's true. But there's another aspect of this there as well. Kirby Smart has said before, their goal right now in the current age in which we live is Georgia's only trying to retain about 70% of the players that signs out of high school. In other words, there is a realistic proposition that everyone acknowledges that about a third at least of the players you bring in are going to be gone, that you're not going to be able to keep them all. And some of these guys who are coming here to be the sort of talented and happy backups that one day go on to great NFL draft success, some of them are also not going to have it work out very well at a place like Georgia. That's also just a fact. But the other thing that we see here is that if you do enter a competition and it doesn't go well, doesn't go the way that you want it to, the good news here is that the stakes of the game for you on that are actually pretty low. I was thinking about this because of something that Gunnar Stockton, the other Georgia quarterback, or one of the other Georgia quarterbacks that's sort of in the mix to be a future starter here at UGA. He was talking during G-Day or around spring practice before we knew that Jaden Rashada was coming here. He was talking about his understanding that Georgia was seeking another quarterback, and Stockton seems to be very much at peace with that, even though the guy they're bringing in is a guy he'll have to compete with. And once again, now that we know that it's Rashada, now that we kind of know how Georgia sort of views all of this, what Stockton said back then I do think is pretty important. So I want you to hear this again. I'm going to kind of sort of try to tie all this together. Here's Gunnar Stockton.
Coach Smart's always said he wants 4 quarterbacks and scholarship quarterbacks on the roster, and I think that's what it probably should be. At the University of Georgia, as a quarterback, why not? Why not would you want to come here? So, heck, it should be a battle and competition and everything. So, it's awesome.
What a great, refreshing perspective. I think that Gunnar Stockton's absolutely right about that. And so when we ask the question of, gosh, how did Georgia convince Jaden Rashada to come to Georgia knowing that all they could promise him was a chance to compete a year from now to be a starting quarterback? That doesn't seem like the sexiest pitch in the world. How does that work? Well, if you ask that about Jaden, you'd ask the same thing about Gunnar Stockton of, this is a guy who was a former, top flight prospect coming out of high school. He's now been waiting year after year for his opportunity. How have they convinced him to stay for quite such a long time? Well, what Kirby Smart said a moment ago provides some insight of that. You may only be a number 2 here. You may only be a number 3 here. But each year that passes, even when you're not playing, you're still getting closer to your ultimate goal, which is to be in the NFL. And when Georgia says that, they obviously really mean that. The track record of Carson Beck, I think, kind of proves how true that is. But there's also this. This past offseason, we saw a guy leave Georgia. Brock Vandagriff, who I also thought was a really good player. He left Georgia. He's gone to Kentucky. He's going to start there for Kentucky this year. I think he's probably set up to be a pretty successful quarterback. I'm also led to believe, because I think a lot of us were a little bit surprised initially that he went to Kentucky. We thought he might be going to a different SEC school. It certainly stands to reason that Vandagriff had a couple of different SEC schools at least that he could have easily gone to. So in other words, you can come here, you can compete, you can be a backup moving towards eventually being the NFL, and if you don't win the competition, then at that point in time, you can go somewhere else, and you can start somewhere else, and you can collect NIL dollars somewhere else. The actual stakes of the game here are not quite as high sometimes as maybe it's sort of suggested that it is. So the overall bottom line is that as a football coach now, you have to deal with the reality that the sport is. It's a transfer portal age. It's an NIL age. Players are just looking around for their best offer. They are looking around for their best deal. And Georgia, I believe, has done a really good job of cultivating a situation where Georgia's offer and deal for its players goes beyond just the NIL. It will be NIL, but it's NIL plus development. It's NIL plus an NFL future. It's also a pathway. If it doesn't quite work out here, then just go somewhere else. Be Brock Vandagriff, and we'll wish you well on the way out the door. That's how Georgia's getting this done. That, to me, is the secret of success here. It's able to convince Jaden Rashada to come and compete, convince Gunnar Stockton to stick around and compete, convince Ryan Puglisi, who's the youngest of the group right now, to sort of travel this same path over the course of the next few years. And the reason why Georgia's case on this, or its pitch on this, is so convincing is because they have the track record to back it up. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We're happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us here on this Mother's Day weekend, live on video, 10 a.m. across all platforms, radio at noon, Athens Sports Radio 960, The Ref, podcasts, wherever you find them. We're just happy to have you with us. I mentioned my mom a moment ago. She's a frequent viewer to our program, so I wish her a happy Mother's Day as she checks in. Happy to have her and all of you with us here today. Looking forward to spending some time with her a couple of different times here this weekend. Really excited about all of that. And for all of you, as you're making your last-minute Mother's Day plans, well, don't forget about our friends at Kroger, because they can help you out, making sure you get ready for everything you need to do to make it a special weekend there for your mom. If you want to do the sort of in-home brunch, you want the mimosas, you want the obviously the floral arrangements that always make that look so pretty, and obviously a traditional gift for moms, the gift card, the greeting cards, the special meal you want to cook. Everything you need to make it a great Mother's Day for the mom in your life is all right there at your local Kroger. So you can stop by and shop in store, of course, but if you want to get an early head start on that, please check out the website. It's Kroger.com/Mother's Day for more on that. Kroger.com/Mother's Day for more on that. All right, we're going to get Jeff Sentell, do some UGA recruiting talk with him coming up in a moment. There is a chance, we've talked about this a couple of times here this week, there is a chance, and perhaps it seems to be a growing chance, that Georgia could be on commitment watch this weekend for a 4-star wide receiver. What is there to know about this? Jeff Sentell is going to tell us more about that here coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, though, I want to go around the doghouse. And speaking of Jeff Sentell, I thought that Jeff had a really good interview on Wednesday with soon-to-arrive running back at Georgia, the 4-star signee Nate Frazier. Now, the one point we've made a couple of times here over the course of the last couple of weeks, for as loaded as Georgia looks, especially right now on the offensive side of the ball, a lot of firepower and interesting discussions being had about Georgia uses all this talent. It is also worth noting there are a couple of other potential contributors and perhaps key contributors to Georgia here this season who haven't quite gotten here yet. One of those is the tight end Ben Urasek. We talked to Terrence Edwards about that yesterday, a guy who was a part of the Stanford offense. Stanford, no great team right now, but Urasek did put up pretty big numbers, was kind of an all Pac-12 player. We think he's likely to have some sort of role on this Georgia team. The same thing for Nate Frazier there, too. Frazier is, and I think that Jeff has described this correctly, the most complete of the running backs that Georgia signed for the 2024 class. And because of Andrew Paul's departure to the transfer portal, because of the fact that for now at least Branson Robinson is still working his way back from injury, because of just the overall landscape, Frazier's a guy, based on the talent we believe that he has, that could step in and could play significantly, we think, for Georgia this season. Probably a situation where maybe Roderick Robinson and Trevor Etienne are kind of the 1-2 punch at running back, but we've seen the number 3 running back at Georgia get significant carries and at times have big moments. DeAndre Swift in the 2017 SEC championship game as a for instance and an example on that. That could be a situation that Frazier finds himself in here this year. So learning as much as we can about Nate before he officially arrives seems like a pretty good thing to do. So that's why it was interesting on Wednesday night on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, when Jeff Sentell kind of asked Frazier about what it was that led him to ultimately choose UGA. And every Dog fan is going to like his answer to this. This is Nate Frazier.
You guys want me to be so honest. The first I give it the first 30 minutes to an hour when I stepped on the campus. Like, it was just a feeling walking in the stadium, just, it's going to be 90,000 people action-packed. The history behind it, the coaches, make it felt like a second home. It's honestly, it was probably like the first hour to 30 minutes in my head. I'm like, yeah, this is where I belong. Like, I feel bad because I would communicate with coaches and other coaches and be like, yeah, yes, sir, coach, this and this. But I knew deep down inside, I'm like, I'm not going to no other school, man. Like, Georgia, it just felt like home the first visit. And I told Coach McGee that when he was there, I'm like, don't be surprised, Coach, if I give it a month or two that I just go, release it to the public and stuff like that. But honestly, it was the first thing. It's just like everything was right. Besides football, if we're not talking football, academically, it's one of the hardest schools to get to into the country. Having that University of Georgia on your resume as well, because a lot of athletes don't think about plan Bs. I'm a person that think about plan B. Of course, that's not my main option of a plan B. I always stick to my plan A because that's what I'm pushing forward to. But you always have to think about a plan B. And so having University of Georgia on your resume can get you a lot of places and open a lot of doors for you as well. So as far as the football part, it has a great academic part as well.
What a great comment from Nate Frazier. And I'm going to be completely honest about this. A lot of you know this. I love Georgia high school football. I'm a little bit of an in-state homer. Anytime Georgia has a chance to sign a great player from in-state, there's a little bit of an extra level of excitement for me about that. I just like Georgia high school football. One of the things, though, that I've grown to learn over the course of the last few years, though, as Georgia has become so successful at recruiting the kind of national prospects, in Frazier's case from the state of California, is the thing that I like about in-state Georgia players, the fact that they love Georgia, they think of it as their home, that out-of-state players can also view Georgia the same way. Because ultimately the thing that you feel connected to is not the soil, it's the people. And in that particular case, Frazier clearly bonded with the people. Now, one of those is Del McGee, who's no longer, with the Georgia program. He's now at Georgia State, but still the same vibe is still there, that there is, kind of a feeling here that Frazier just sort of sees this as home. He used that word. He described it as home there. And I've kind of, come to learn that you can be from California and still view Georgia's home the same way that you can view Georgia's home if it is your home state. And I think that's really exciting to think a guy like that, who's traveling a long way to get here, already views Georgia as positively as he does. And I also think that it is truly really exciting to think about what he might be able to do in a Georgia uniform here this year. I think low-key one of the biggest signings that Georgia made for that 2024 class. And, it perhaps gets a little bit out of sight, out of mind because he wasn't one of the huge number of early enrollees that Georgia had. but a guy who's clearly excited about getting his Georgia career started. And I believe that Georgia fans are just as excited about that as Frazier is himself. And that is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. All right, a couple of big things for us here before we are done. One of these things is a little bit of a dire warning. I don't take great pleasure in saying this, but one of the things that I warned might be coming to college football in the near future appears that it has a chance of actually happening. And I am forced to tell you about that here today. On a more positive note, a Georgia athlete who just continues to set records at an unbelievable pace did so again last night. And this is certainly worth celebrating, and we will do that before we are concluded on the show here today. But for now, more on Frazier, the possibility that Georgia's on commit watch here this weekend, and so much more. Let's get ready to find out about everything happening on the UGA recruiting front as we welcome in Jeff Sentell here to DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Obviously, potentially a busy weekend for Georgia, and Jeff himself has been busy here as he's been out and about on the recruiting trail, of course, the last few days. Before we're done, I want to try to find out some of what Jeff has seen here as of late, and that should be a lot of fun. But, Jeff, prior to that, let me bring you in on what we were just discussing, your interview with Nate Frazier from this past week. I think you and I are of the same mind on this. I believe that Frazier has a really good chance to be a pretty significant contributor to Georgia here this season. You know, Georgia oftentimes has multiple running backs to get significant carries. We think that Frazier can get a good number of carries for Georgia here this year. And in the clip we just heard, this is a guy who's clearly very excited to get his Georgia career started. What else did you kind of take from your conversation with Nate there on Wednesday night?
Hey, Brandon. Happy Friday. Good morning, everybody. Man, I tell you, Brennan, I don't know if this is the way you would be if you were a Georgia football signee, but he's got a countdown on his calendar on his cell phone that counts down to the minute, the days before he arrives in Athens. You want to talk production? Let's just jump into that. I think, remember that 2017 team, Brandon, where like DeAndre Swift was a pretty effective number 3. He had runs like this. I remember the run against Notre Dame. Everybody remembers the run that he had against Auburn in the SEC championship game. But I think Frazier can give you that, especially since Frazier, he told me it was funny. He got to Athens and he was in January there for a visit. And he said several of his teammates, most notably Ryan Puglisi, said, dude, you better come in shape, the best shape of your life, to be ready for this. And Nate Frazier has taken up that gauntlet, and he's about 5'10". He's like 204, 206 right now, with a passion, man, a true passion for all things Georgia. He is electric. He is. I mean, it's kind of funny. I don't think many people know the story about Nate really well. He wasn't the regular A1A starter at Mater Dei. He kind of split carries, split a lot of time, was a change of pace back a little bit, even at that size, because they had a 2025 5-star also in the same backfield. Can you believe that? Nate wound up the number 2 running back in the country, at least for on3.com. And he's the type of guy that doesn't mind sharing workload. He's the type of guy very driven, very purposeful. But the thing about it, Brandon, I always think it's important to go to Texas for these All-American Bowls, and also to Orlando for the Under Armour game. Because you get all these guys on the big stage where everybody on the field is a major college prospect. They're one of those 2 or 3 teams, 2 or 3 prospects at every school that they're like, this is our guy. This is the guy that we think will click and be a leader of the class. And Nate got on that stage that week in San Antonio, and everybody was like, whoa, we really got something here. And the way he stood out on that field, making plays against the best players in the country, really told me that he can really accelerate a quick learning curve at Georgia.
I apologize for not knowing this, but why did he want to stay and complete his high school career? I know a lot of guys are sometimes 2 sports stars. Is he a track guy or something like that? Why did he want to finish out his second semester there at Mater Dei?
Yeah, it's a track thing initially. He wanted to run track. He wanted to, and it's also bringing a lot of credits. Sometimes it's just really hard for kids to graduate that early. I think it is now the norm, don't get me wrong, but I don't know if the average DawgNation Daily listener, viewer, community member knows how hard it is for these young men to graduate early. Some of it means they're taking multiple classes in the summer. It's also very costly for them to get these classes. Some of them they have to pay for, like online courses and things like that, just so they can get to Athens and get ready. So I know it's the norm now. Georgia, 22 out of their 28 high school signees enrolled early, but it is still a measure of hardship to get all of that stuff done. And Nate kind of looked at it as, pros and cons about whether he wanted to show up or not, man. But I'm going to tell you, Brandon, this is very much an inside DawgNation baseball story, but like Nate is such a good dude. And it's clear. I think we had some feedback on our latest Before the Hedges show where we had Nate Frazier, we had Ryan Montgomery interview on, we had Ethan Barbour on, and people were just like, with guys like these, how can we lose? But these are just great reflections of great overall character people. Here's an example. Nate Frazier, because I guess he saw some of our DawgNation kind of promos online about 8 p.m. He just got back with me about like 10 o'clock that night saying, all right, do I need to come on and do it again for live on the West Coast? He was awesome. Willing to do that. I mean, and this is the same kid where I said, I was working on a story about one of his teammates, Mark Bowman, who's been called Baby Brock. And I said, hey man, what do you think about Mark? Do you think he can play at that level? And listen, the way this happens thousands of times is the young man will text me out a quote of great. Here's what Nate Frazier did. He got in that voice recorder on his phone, and he basically had a minute and a half thought stream of consciousness on what people needed to know about Mark Bowman. And he sent me that text message. He wants to get into real estate. He wants to get into communications, but already that young man has a talent to be in the media.
Well, I think that's outstanding. There's some excitement also for Georgia here this weekend. A guy that I don't think you and I have talked about a ton. We've talked about him some on the show here the last couple of days. That's Thomas Blackshear, receiver from the Savannah area. And it's amazing how talented the Savannah area has, kind of become from a high school football standpoint here in Georgia. But it seems like he's heading – we think this is a commitment decision here this weekend. Sometimes the eyeball emoji and the date ends up being something different. But we think this is a commitment announcement here. And it sort of seems like based on the online chatter, Georgia might be in a pretty good spot here. A lot of in-state receivers for Georgia to be paying attention to here this cycle. And Blackshear certainly appears to be one of those. What can you tell us about Blackshear ahead of what I believe is – perhaps a Sunday commitment announcement from him?
Yeah, this is interesting, Brandon. This is more, how the traditional vernacular for commitment watch is, would Georgia get a commitment? Well, there's not only that, but there's a commitment watch on whether he's actually going to commit. I mean, there's some vagueness to this. I saw on your program earlier this week that the GOAT Terrence Edwards gave him his stamp.
He did.
This is a young man that was initially at Benedictine, another very strong football program in the Savannah area, and the Coastal Empire for those elite types that have ever lived in Chatham County. But he moves to Calvary Day, another great program. And it was FSU, Georgia, Tennessee. He's got a former quarterback now at Tennessee, but it feels like Georgia has kind of eked ahead. And I think, if we're being frank, Brandon, probably the reason why we haven't talked about him a lot is, there's a lot of great receivers Georgia's going after. Javon Boggs, the former Ohio State commitment out of Florida is another great example. We've got C.J. Wiley. We've got Travis Smith Jr. You got Thomas Blackshear. I think T.E. said it would be great if Georgia can stay in-state and clean up with at least those three in-state. So this is one of those things where Georgia's going to have to build this wide receiver class. I don't know. I feel duty bound to make sure I can tell our audience here about the team, especially from a recruiting and restocking standpoint. Brandon, it is not rocket science or amateur math to look at Georgia's roster for 2024 and project that they're going to need 5, maybe 6 receivers. Of course, a couple of those will probably come out of the portal, but they're going to have to shop a lot to get restock the room for James Coley in 2025. And I really think that Georgia may take about, at least 3-4 high school wide receivers in order to accomplish that end.
Yeah, I just think that what's interesting to me about this is it seems like you want to go back to say last year or maybe the last couple of years where it seemed like the portal, whether it was officially stated so or not, was Georgia's main mechanism for finding wide receiver talent. And I would say for the most part, that's kind of worked. I mean, some of Georgia's best receivers this year are going to be former transfers. So clearly there's no issues there with that. And overall, whatever Georgia's doing offensively seems to be working because they're scoring points at a, fairly unprecedented clip the last 3 years. So it's all working fine, but it hasn't been a lot of high school recruiting for the receivers the way that's the primary means of finding talent at other position groups. Well, it sort of seems like whether it's just a coincidence or there's just a sort of a renewed effort or what it is, it seems like high school recruiting of receivers is sort of back in style again for Georgia. Is that your read on the situation too?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a renaissance movement, Brandon. Not only are these guys in state very good and they're very mature, most of these guys are 6'3", 6'4". When you look at Travis Smith, you look at CJ Wiley. I think it's also, I'm going to be frank, Brandon, I think it's also price tags. The elite high school wide receivers are commanding a major price tag through inducements, through NILs, through collectives. And Georgia has found that they can get greater value in terms of NIL with just bringing out a proven SEC player like a WR Thomas, like a Dominic Lovett, and in even guys like London Humphrey this year and Colby Young this year as well. I mean, Michael Jackson III, throw all that in there. It seems like it's more plug and play at the receiver position because we've documented, Brandon, that Georgia has went after some of the big guys like Luther Burden, Evan Stewart, multiple times actually, in the case of Stewart. And, they just found out that the cost of doing business for that elite wide receiver, especially coming out of high school ranks, is different. Well, Georgia, with this select group of in-state recruits, these weren't the guys that were the 5 stars. These are the guys that Georgia found that were, low to mid 4 stars in state. And they have been on them early. They've built that relationship. And now CJ Wiley, you see there, man, if that dude's not a top 5 wide receiver across all boards by the end of his senior year, then there should be some recruiting ranking malpractice considered there. But I really feel that these are some guys that are not only in state, they're talented, they're kind of plug and play players, but they're maybe a little bit different than the, I guess, quote unquote, diva receiver we see a lot these days. I mean, the NIL collective inducement is not the biggest thing on their minds.
So to kind of wrap this particular part of the discussion up, when it goes back to Blackshear here for a moment, do you kind of join, I guess, the rest of the chorus in saying that it certainly seems like Georgia's in a pretty good spot here for him, and perhaps, the other 2 finalists maybe kind of distancing themselves from that a little bit, that if Blackshear does pull the trigger on a Mother's Day commitment, it will be UGA that stands to be the beneficiary here?
Yeah, that's basically the way it's been trending. Florida State has kind of dipped off. He had a top 3 he established a while back. It's been Georgia, Tennessee. Man, the things you don't know with Tennessee now is things are getting very interesting again for them on the NIL front. They could definitely make a move in a certain direction. You see a lot of things. I mean, they've made a surge move with David Sanders Jr. Both Tennessee and Ohio State have done so in the last few weeks. Sanders has actually taken an official visit this weekend in Nebraska, and everybody's old friend Dylan Raiola he added another official visit to his docket as well. So, yeah, I think Georgia is in a nice spot with Blackshear, and we'll wait and see what, I guess, matriculates on May 12th to see what he eventually decides to do.
All right, I want to say this, and this is, we don't even have a graphic for this. This is not a planned question, but you brought this up, and I find this to be fascinating because I have been following this story a little bit. Obviously, I'd love for Georgia to get David Sanders. I would. But the fact that Tennessee and Ohio State have seemingly surged here so much, and there's plenty of chatter on the internet about that, obviously NIL-related recruitments for both those programs, we would be led to believe. Man, that to me is a stinging blow for Clemson. Now, listen, I'd love to see Georgia get Sanders. I think you got to get the best offensive tackles in every class in perpetuity if you want to remain national championship contenders. So I'm not saying it's nothing if Georgia doesn't get him, but Georgia just came off a 2024 class and they had a huge haul along the offensive line. Clemson is desperate for offensive linemen. The fact that it's Clemson who's no longer being mentioned among the top favorites for Sanders, Jeff, I found that to be a really big deal and really telling about kind of just sort of where things are at kind of a precarious point in Dabo Swinney's career. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but since you mentioned it, I think this is one of the more fascinating recruiting soap operas that's sort of out there right now.
I think what's going to happen, Brandon, is I think Dabo will have to really look at a lot of the ways and ins and outs of his program. The main thing there, Brandon, is it's not only that, he's kind of doing it differently on both ends of the talent intake spectrum. They're not going to be the high bidder in NIL. Clemson won't. And then also they're not taking in any players from the transfer portal. I think there was a graphic, I don't know if you caught it this week, where the only school in Power 4 now that has not taken any transfers for the 2024 season, that was Clemson. So I don't know how you're going to do it if you're not doing it with the portal and you're not doing it with any sort of competitive NIL game with the high school kids. I think it is a telling blow. And Brandon, you got to remember, I mean, I've always been high on Sanders. I think he is as good as any offensive lineman Georgia has recruited in quite some time. The feet are there. He's just coming off a shoulder repair. He was power cleaning 360 this week in the Providence Day school weight room. That is massive for a young man that's 6'7". His weight is already up in the 280 range now, so he's checking all the boxes there. But as I stated earlier, Brandon, offensive line, I don't know. I'm going to try to do a better job when we talk about recruiting and really tie it into not just, hey, Georgia needs a number 1 class and all the 5 stars, but what Georgia really needs is to restock several positions. I mean, I don't know if this is a glaring thing for a fan because it is right here, right now, but Georgia could have 3-4 new starters on the offensive line in 2025. They'd have a new starter quarterback. They could bring in 4-5 new receivers for their room, several new starters there as well. Like that offensive side of the ball, you can even say Oscar Delp may even have a great junior year and maybe bolt to the NFL, but you would look at Georgia's offense and it would be radically different across the board in 2025. And that's why these recruiting classes, 2024 did a great job of it, but also 2025, they've got to do a massive return on getting really good players in those depth charts for the future.
All right, really quick final thing for you. You can give us a quick snapshot thumbnail if you don't mind. I know you've seen some state track events here as of late. You've traveled around. You visited some recruits. We've talked some about that last week as it relates to stops by Milton and things like that. Give me just something that has kind of popped up to you as you have really over the course of the last couple of weeks been visiting with a good number of recruits.
So one thing, I think I'm tracking 7 dates in July that Georgia is a major target to land a commitment from.
Okay.
Remember how we spoke recently in kind of guarded tones about how Kirby's trying to play air traffic controller again in July with landing up those momentum publicity recruits back to back to back. I see that kind of formulating there. I guess I'm trying to sound like the weatherman right now, pointing off to a grid and saying we're seeing this formulating, this mass accumulating in July. Here's the other thing, Brandon. Nasir Johnson. Man, I'm going to give your audience a little teaser that the pages of DawgNation.com hasn't gotten yet. I asked him yesterday, what's the plan? What's the goal at Georgia? And you see him right there. He won the state title in the discus. He threw that thing 170 feet. That's a new state record for 1A. Brendan, not only has he probably gotten an inch or so taller and put on 30 pounds since last fall, he's right at 6'6" right now, 335. But I asked him, what's the plan? What have you heard from Georgia? What can you be in Athens? What's the goal? Nasir's a great kid. He's got long-term goals and short-term goals. Nasir said, my agenda is to give Georgia something that's a cross between Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis.
Wow.
Think about that for a second.
Wow.
That wants to make you go run through a wall on a Friday morning on DawgNation Daily. That might do it. He gets to Athens on May 28th. Also, I got to be very clear. Let's talk about another Georgia target. 2024 defensive line target, Christian Garrett out of Prince Avenue Christian, Brandon. Great story here. Remarkable story right here. He had shoulder surgery in the offseason. He got cleared to throw the shot put maybe 2 days before the region meet. He competed in the region meet, the sectionals meet, and then the state track championships yesterday in Rome. He won the state title in the shot put. And with a pretty good throw, I think it was like 49 feet. His best one was like 51, 52, but he's down to 4 schools, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Tennessee, and then also then also Clemson. Those are the 4 schools he's going to see. He's going to see Clemson, Georgia, Georgia Tech, and Tennessee in that order. And then he's also going to make his recruiting decision on July the 20th as well. So this is a guy, he said Trey Scott was texting him all throughout the meet. He tried to get him to make it. He even said Trey Scott said, hey, man, that would be really good for you. I see you're competing against Nasir already in the shot put. Now, Nasir did not win the shot put. That's not really his major thing, but that was already like Trey Scott had his eyes and ears plugged into Rome yesterday because he had a major 2025 target in Christian Garrett winning the state title in the shot put. And then he had a prize defensive line signee. Let's also celebrate a former flip from Florida, also winning the state title in the discus. So that's pretty cool.
Phenomenal level of talent as well at a small classification private school like Prince Avenue. Amazing what they're able to do right now on both sides of the ball. Jeff, fascinating stuff. I know if something does break out here this weekend, you'll be all over that. And, of course, we'll look forward to having you back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger again very soon. Please wish your wife a happy Mother's Day. And, of course, we'll look forward to having you back here very soon.
Hey, happy Mother's Day to everybody out there, man. Appreciate you, B.A.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, really good and fascinating stuff with Jeff Sentell there. And with that said, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And, you know, last night I was doing some stuff. Every now and then I like just sort of like, I'm like a lot of you. I'll just sort of play around on YouTube or something like that. And I'm looking at all these videos of Utopia of the Seas because it's always interesting when a ship like this debuts for the first time. You know, some of this is the kind of artist rendering stuff that they put out, and there's all kinds of rumors about all the other stuff that's going to be there. And you know, I'm getting excited because it's, you know, it's time to start talking about, you know, what the summer's going to be like. And I'm going to have myself the opportunity to be among the very first to set sail on Utopia of the Seas. And I can't wait to come back and tell you all about it. You just saw a picture there of the Ultimate Abyss. One of the things I was reading about yesterday, so the Ultimate Abyss is the tallest slide at sea, and it's a dry slide. It's not like a water slide, it's a dry slide. And they've done something really cool where, like, with the Ultimate Abyss that sort of starts at, like, the top of the pool deck and goes all the way down to kind of like the boardwalk neighborhood, you know, many, many decks below. They've made it so that the slide sort of winds a little wider, and the pathway is even a little longer. So what was already the tallest slide at sea is now going to be even taller. And I continue to be excited about Royal Railway, the brand new restaurant concept that it's almost like a theme park attraction where you enter the rail car and the rail car uses some, I guess you call it like augmented reality type situation where it feels like you're, you know, rolling down the track. And even though you're sailing at sea, it feels like you're on a rail car that's going down the railways across these beautiful scenes. And I know Giovanni's Italian Kitchen, one of the cool, obviously, Italian restaurant concepts that they have, is going to have a new location. If you're familiar with the Oasis-class ships, they're putting Giovanni's at a different spot to make room for Izumi there as a part of the Central Park neighborhood. So a little bit of a different look, a little bit of a different feel, but, man, so much to experience. So I can't wait to go and see it and come back and tell all of you about it. And I can't wait for you to reach out to my friend Jessica Slater and get your own trip on board Utopia of the Seas, booked here for this summer and heading towards the fall. I've even seen some great savings out there right now on Utopia of the Seas. That's definitely something you want to ask Jessica about. So give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She will tell you about all of that. All right, so a couple of things here. Thing number one is this. We've been talking a lot lately about the level of hype that seems to exist around Ohio State. And I believe I may have briefly mentioned some of this the other day, but I want to kind of dive a little deeper on this. I've got no problem with people talking about the fact that Ohio State's had a very aggressive offseason. I've got no problem, you know, mentioning Ohio State among the obviously key contenders alongside Georgia. And obviously a year ago, as we pointed out, you know, those who hyped up Michigan turned out to be right. Maybe some of those who are hyping up Ohio State this year will turn out to be right. Maybe finally Ryan Day will get off third base and actually win something of note, something of consequence, something that thus far in his career he has not been able to do. And yet, even if you acknowledge that, of course, Ohio State looks to be a pretty good team on paper, I think there is still a point at which some of the chat around the Buckeyes gets to be a little bit out of control. For instance, there's this, Richard Johnson. You may know him. He's been a writer out there for a while. He was on an SEC network show for a while, not a very good one, but nonetheless, he was on it. And he was doing a podcast thing the last few days talking about Ohio State, and here's how far Richard Johnson, fairly prominent voice in the college football media space, here's how far he's willing to take it when it comes to Ohio State. He says, first of all, I think Ohio State is going to win the national championship. And I don't think just win the national championship. This is what he says. I think this Ohio State team has a chance to be one of the better teams in the playoff era. This is on the Split Zone Duo, the name of the show. He says, I think we're in the time where old teams have a decided advantage over younger teams, more so than you might think. This is an old defense, man. They're all redshirt juniors, grad transfers, been there a long time. And they've added probably the best defensive player in college football in Caleb Downs at safety, and he's probably the best player on the team. So I think that when it comes to defense, I think I said this the other day. I know I said it on our RS Andrews cool down. I will give Ohio State credit for this going back a couple of years ago. They knew they needed to get better on defense. For the most part, they have. Made a pretty good defensive coordinator hire. The overall talent level has been upgraded. I think they've, I do think they've gotten a little bit better on that side of the ball. And obviously, I would agree with the point that Richard Johnson's making when he says experience, older players against younger players. We've seen that in college football the last few years. There's clearly an advantage to having a little age to you. That there's no doubt that it's true. But the one thing I would at least express some skepticism about is this notion that you can be an all-time great team, best team in the college football playoff era, when on paper you don't have a very good offensive line and you have a total unknown at quarterback. And that's going to be the fascinating thing about Ohio State here this year. And this is me taking off my Georgia fan hat, and to the extent that I have, the ability to be objective about this, putting on my, college football analyst hat here for a moment. One of the very sharp contrasts in all of college football right now is a team like Ohio State that seems to have everything and seems to have had a very good transfer portal offseason. The fact that right now, even Buckeyes fans themselves don't quite know what the quarterback situation is. Howard, the guy they brought over from Kansas State, even Buckeyes fans themselves will tell you, we're not quite sure how good he can be, and we're not quite so sure he's obviously better than Kyle McCord was a year ago, a player who proved himself not to be good enough. Devin Brown, there's some hope for him, but honestly, that has sort of receded into the background a little bit over the last couple of months. There is some chatter about Julian Sayin, but if he's good enough to start for Ohio State, why was Alabama so willing to allow him to depart for Ohio State? It seems like they were kind of okay with that. So this is not me telling you that everybody who's hyping up Ohio State is wrong, but for anybody who's even talking about this team may be historically good, boy, you got to explain to me how the offensive line gets better, and you got to tell me for certain what Ohio State has at quarterback. Even those who know the Buckeyes best, I don't think they would say they do that here at the moment. All right, let me transition to another topic here as a part of Cruising Around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And I'm going to be in a soapbox slightly just for a moment. The thing that frustrates me about the radical change that college football is undergoing here at the moment, the thing that frustrates me the most is I seem to be the only one noticing something that just seems to be obviously about to take place. And when you're all by yourself on something, you're either the rightest person in the world or you're so wrong you don't even know up from down. You can decide for yourself which one of those, I am on this, I guess. But something that seems obvious to me doesn't even seem to get mentioned in other places. The one thing that I've been saying is, for the people who are celebrating the quick, very aggressive embrace of the professionalization of the college football player, where you take the players in the sport, who have up to this point in time been amateur athletes getting some money either under the table or over the table or whatever else that it was, now to be sort of classified professionals, in some cases maybe employees, collective bargaining, things like that. The one thing that I've been warning against, we're not against players getting paid, but the one thing I've been warning against is the more this becomes professionalized, the more this is going to become like the NFL, which means two things we will notice. There will be fewer players, and eventually there'll be fewer teams. That's just a fact. And if all of this is being done, the professionalization of this sport through, the things that are out there right now, if this is being done to benefit the players, then if there are fewer players, is that really a benefit to the average player? And we talk about stuff like this. The one thing that I'm always very cognizant of is, and any topic on the show, I don't want to do anything that sort of veers outside the direction of college football because that's not what you came to hear. But I feel like in this particular topic, there's almost certain things that no matter how hard you try not to say them, eventually you do sort of have to say them. Like what's about to happen to college football, I have to just be honest here. And if you don't like this part, then I totally get it. I'll shut up in a couple of seconds. It sort of feels like the thing where you go to people and say, hey, good news. Minimum wage is now $20 an hour. Bad news. Your job got replaced by a computer. Like, it sort of feels like that sort of situation here of, hey, good news, you're a professional. Bad news, you got fired. And let me show you this, from Ross Dellinger here. Respected reporter. I think he's about as good as there is. So as the NCAA sort of sifts through what the future of college athletics is going to look like, here's what Dellinger wrote on the X platform yesterday. What's the future of walk-ons? Dellinger says college leaders are considering a reduction in football rosters to as few as 85. I believe the number right now is 120. You can have 85 on scholarship. I believe you can have 120 on your roster overall. Sources tell Yahoo Sports, though, that number could be dropped to 85, essentially ending walk-ons. Dellinger says that he's writing basically on the latest on a settlement-related new model that not only features revenue share, but could overall NCAA roster structure. The reason why is that the sort of non-SEC, non-Georgia programs are all pretty cheap. And if they don't have to pay for it, they're not going to. And if you have to pay players in the future, teams don't want to pay 120 of them. They, in the future, I believe, won't even want to pay 85 of them either. That's where I believe all of this is heading. So for all the people who are saying, man, we got to embrace as much NIL as we can and embrace the professionalization of this sport as we can because that's what's good for players. If there are fewer players when it's all said and done, is it really good for the average player? I wish someone with more power than me would honestly consider that question. Not sure if they ever will. One more thing to give you here as a part of cruising around the SEC a little bit, and this is not really a Georgia story anymore, but it's still an SEC story. I saw where Julian Juju Lewis has scheduled what I would think would be described as a fairly unexpected visit. In addition to going to Auburn and still committed to USC and obviously in the mix for Colorado, he's also planning a visit to Indiana there as well. What I think is kind of fascinating here is that with Georgia out of the running for Lewis, and I don't take any great pleasure in saying this because I like Lewis as a player, you kind of wonder what this has done overall to his NIL kind of marketability, his ability to command a high dollar in the market here, just knowing that one of the big suitors for him is gone. He clearly doesn't want to go to USC. Otherwise, he wouldn't be taking all these other visits. I don't know how you can take Colorado seriously right now. It's not even obvious that Deion Sanders wants to coach there beyond Shador and Shiloh's tenure there. And you've got Auburn, who has money to spend, but as Hugh Freeze told you this week, they want to be pretty judicious about how you spend it. So the absence of Georgia in the recruitment of Lewis, I think, has perhaps had like a butterfly effect type impact on how his recruitment plays out. And so we may see, if I'm guessing here, maybe more mystery suitors popping up for Lewis here a little bit as he tries to, I think, kind of raise the value back up here so that a school like Auburn, who I think some people kind of view as perhaps the eventual favorite here, might have another, I guess, competitor to kind of raise the negotiation stakes for a little bit. We'll watch that. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, here on DawgNation Daily, it's time for our Long Finish presented by the Finnish Long Drink. And this is the kind of time during the show where we kind of look at the week and sort of celebrate some things going on around UGA that perhaps we haven't had quite as much time to talk about. And one of those things played out for us again last night. A guy that we've certainly mentioned frequently lately, that's the UGA baseball slugger Charlie Condon, who hit his 34th home run of the season last night. That's 8 consecutive games for Condon with a home run. He's got 1 fewer home run than he has strikeouts this year. It is, however you want to slice the numbers, what Condon is doing is just absolutely remarkable. A few years ago, there was a change made to the baseball bats. They now swing what they call BB core bats, which are bats that are almost as heavy as they are long. It's what they call a drop 3. It can be 3 ounces lighter than the number of inches that it is long. It's a much different bat than college baseball used to be. Balls don't travel quite as far, so therefore, we're kind of in a different era for the sport when it comes to the overall numbers. So in this BB core era, no one's ever hit more home runs in a season than Charlie Condon has for Georgia right now, a season that's obviously still ongoing. So it seemed appropriate for us to find out a little bit more about the amazing story of Condon and how he came to be what he is here right now. Our Cody Chaffins, who does such a great job of helping make sure DawgNation Daily looks nice each and every day on video, put together a package the other day. You can see this obviously on the DawgNation YouTube page. Many of you already have. But as a part of our Long Finish here today, brought to you by the Finnish Long Drink, how about a deeper look at the year for Charlie Condon and the amazing thing that it is? Let's take a look at that right now.
Poise, power, and Georgia Bulldog Charlie Condon is the most prolific home run hitter in the country. And with this blast against Texas A&M earlier this season, Condon not only broke UGA's single-season home run record, but also the career mark, replacing Gordon Beckham in the Bulldog record books.
I obviously know the significance of breaking Gordon's record and how well respected he is at this university, and getting to know him earlier this year has been awesome. And so just to be mentioned with names like that is something that I'll always be grateful for. But we're going to continue to win some games before we look at stuff like that.
What's more remarkable is that Condon is only a sophomore. When he arrived in Athens in 2021, he wasn't on scholarship. A preferred walk-on out of the Walker School in Marietta, he was redshirted.
I was here as a preferred walk-on, so there was nothing guaranteed but the belief in myself and knowing that I had done the work to put myself in a situation to succeed at a league with this caliber players. And so that's kind of what kept me locked in, is knowing that, like, hey, I'm not just going to roll over and let 1 year decide my entire collegiate baseball career and just be a redshirt guy that never really got off the bench.
Condon came off the bench for the 2023 season, firing, capturing the team triple crown, and being named National Freshman of the Year. And now in 2024, he's turned things up another notch.
It's not an overnight one-click thing where you wake up and you're a different person the next day, and that's the beauty of the game, is just knowing that you've got to show up and commit to your craft the same amount every day, or else it's not going to pay off for you. So just being able to come and bring it every day is what makes it work.
Condon's eye-popping stats have brought on even more attention from across the country. He's now on the short list to win the Golden Spikes Award given to the nation's best ball player. What's more, according to his coach and teammates, Condon couldn't be handling all of this attention any better.
And then I've never seen anybody handle it off the field as gracefully, I guess, it would be the term I use, as he has this year. And what he's done is just unbelievable. He just understands it's a team game. He understands this game's hard. He understands that he's only, if you don't have Corey Collins in front of him getting on base, then they're able to come right at Charlie or just put him on base.
He does it most on his own. So I can say he's a great guy, and that just shows how he is. I know. It's a surprise to hear that someone like that isn't above everybody else, because you would expect it, but he's really not. He's the team guy that picks everybody up when it needs to be done.
Yeah, no, they keep me in check for sure, but I'm lucky to have them. It's a great group. We all love each other a lot, and I think that's why this works so well. I'm lucky to be a part of it, and they definitely help me keep my head on straight. Yeah.
His head will soon be wearing the cap of a major league team. Condon's on track to potentially be the #1 overall pick in this summer's MLB draft. But while the big leagues and the big bucks are on the way, this dog is keeping his head down.
Internally, I know that stuff's going to handle itself when the time comes, but really the way that I found that I'm most successful is always just focusing on what's in front of me. And so, yeah, I'll when that stuff comes around this summer, I'll cross that bridge when it gets there. But right now, I'm just going to continue to try to play my best baseball and be a helping product for this program.
From riding the pine as a redshirt walk-on to hearing his name called first on draft night, it's a storybook that even this humble third baseman and outfielder will have trouble digesting.
I don't know if it'll ever fully sink in, to be honest, but it's a rewarding feeling knowing that the work that I've put in the past 3 years and where I was as a senior in high school has really started to click, and just the fact that it's able to benefit a program of guys that work so hard every day. I just love being able to help out with that.
Although he is an individual star, spend any time around Charlie Condon and it's clear for him, it's all about the G. For DawgNation, I'm Cody Chaffins.
And, of course, Georgia won a wild one last night at South Carolina. Series continues today and tomorrow and Saturday as Georgia's kind of in contention with the Gamecocks and probably also Mississippi State there as well teams looking to be NCAA regional hosts, but that's very much in play for Georgia here right now. And that great package on Charlie Condon, a big explanation as to why. That's also the Long Finish here, brought to you by our friends at the Finnish Long Drink. Now, as you're heading towards a Mother's Day weekend, you want to make it really fun with your mother for this Mother's Day? How about some Finnish Long Drink to enjoy? Maybe she'd love the peach-flavored version here in the Peach State for a limited time, or perhaps the Long Drink Cranberry. We know how popular that is. Obviously, it's about to be pool time for us, and the Long Drink Cranberry is always a big part of our pool celebrations. Long Drink Traditional, that's probably still my favorite. The blue can, I like the grapefruit flavor. I love the gin kick, and I love the story. And the Finnish Long Drink comes from Helsinki back in the 1950s when the Summer Games were there. It's been in America for a few years. It's in Georgia now. A lot of celebrity investors have helped spread the good word about exactly what the Finnish Long Drink's all about, a ready-to-drink cocktail. And this sort of category of beverage, I don't think any of them tastes better than the Finnish Long Drink does, dominating the flavor in the ready-to-drink cocktail category. So make sure you try some. And if you haven't before, you go to the website, thelongdrink.com. You can put in your zip code, and you can find out where to pick some up today. The Finnish Long Drink, here with us on DawgNation Daily, each and every week. Hadn't done this in a while, but how about a little bit of a Friday shoes dump here? Good collection of golden shoes to go into the weekend with. Speaking of Charlie Condon, our good friend Jack Leo got some video of him the other day throwing the football. He's a former high school quarterback. That caused Joe Bowker on X to say, Charlie Condon's probably better than any quarterback that Billy Napier currently has on his roster. That's very funny from Joe. We'll give him a golden shoe for that. Also, keeping things going here, we've talked a lot this week about Kirby Smart at the Celebrity Golf Tournament. David Lorberbaum was actually there. He says, we were watching Kirby on the hole where the swing that was caught on video was. He says he almost got up and down from the woods, which is an incredible shot. The neighbors in the course are big Dogs fans, but Kirby Smart was also kind enough to take a picture with my son. So Dave and his son having a great time. We'll give golden shoes to them. And for Kirby stopping to pause for a picture, that's a nice thing to see. Ant-Man getting a lot of attention as of late. Anthony Edwards obviously taking the NBA by storm. A lot of Dog fans very proud of that. Our buddy Ryan Walker writes in that everyone's just now getting on that Ant-Man bandwagon, but this ain't nothing new. We've been riding with Ant since he was balling as a dog. Ant-Man will be the face of the NBA soon. We'll give Ryan Walker a golden shoe for shouting that out. Also, our buddy Georgia on Tab sharing this from the account that maybe you've seen before, Art, but make it sports. The flex from Ant-Man to the crowd, also reminiscent of a famous painting from the past. I think that's an amazing account, and nice to see the former dog Ant-Man getting some love from them, and Georgia on Tap sharing that with us. Well, that'll give him a golden shoe there as well. Also, for me, being back again on Utopia of the Seas coming up in July, Bill Sanders shares the famous meme of the lady yelling at the cat, saying, "You said no more cruises." And the cat, of course, says back, "I said no more cruises." Well, guess what? We are going to take another cruise here on Utopia of the Seas very soon, so I can come back and tell all of you about all of that. And then another golden shoe going the direction finally here to Derek Smith. Every now and then I get undone by a typo. Occasionally I'm guilty of those. I guess last week I had on here that the four-star prospect Juan Gaston, we had him as a wide receiver. Derek Smith said, that is one big wide receiver. Yes, indeed. Gaston's a pretty big athlete. If anybody from the offensive line ranks could do that, maybe he would be the one. But in this particular case, obviously Gaston's the offensive lineman. Funny stuff from Derek. We'll give him a golden shoe for that. Not quite as funny, though, for those lousy, stinking Gators. Obviously, it's been a rough stretch for them as of late, and we love the idea of that continuing. How about a Gator hater updater here for them? Been a long time since they've beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. How about 1,280 days? That's how long it's been. So, y'all have a great weekend. Happy Mother's Day to you all. We'll see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that today. How about the great package there from Cody Chaffins on Charlie Condon? You certainly love to see that, and best of luck to the Diamond Dogs as they try to stay hot and keep their winning ways alive here with South Carolina there at Founders Park in Columbia the next couple of days. All right, let's get some comments from you. And we'll see what's on everybody's mind here as we get ready to roll into the weekend. I want to start on Facebook today, and then we'll kind of see what everybody else has got going on. On Facebook, we just heard from Bill Sanders, a part of our Golden Shoe. He's a frequent Facebook commenter, no doubt probably in here today. And let's see who else is in here there as well. All right, on Facebook for a moment. Now it pops up. Dark Brooks checking in to say, go Dogs. Dark, we're glad you're here. Miriam Corbin, very happy about Cody's content. Yeah, Cody does a great job. That's a terrific package. It's one of those things that takes a long time to put together, but obviously tells the story very well of what he's bringing to the table. Joseph Kennedy says, the Ant-Man, baby, who can stop him? Yeah, listen, it's been one of the fun things to see. It's the biggest story in the NBA right now, I believe. Now, the Knicks obviously think they're the biggest story. But in terms of the emergence of an individual star, Ant-Man looks to be that guy, and it's fun to see. Miriam Corbin brings up a really good point that she says, I'd give almost anything to be with my mom again, even for a day. Y'all celebrate the joy of still having your mom with you. Yeah, it's just one of those things where, and we all say this out loud, and we try to live it, but it's not always easy, that, you want to appreciate what you have while you have it. Now, thankfully, I still obviously have my mom. She's, very, very young. But for those who are obviously in a little bit of a different situation, it's just one of those deals where you got to appreciate what you have. I know one of our producers, Jay Black, understands that. My wife understands that. I've obviously experienced that with my father. It's like you try to appreciate what you have and you try to be wise about that and realize, listen, enjoy it while you got it. But, it's still easy sometimes to forget that. But Miriam, very important reminder. Appreciate that. Barry Watkins, the subject of the softball tournament where Georgia takes on Florida. We're excited about that today there as well. After a thrilling game the other day. So some of y'all who know softball better than I do, and I've told you before, I don't know anything about softball. You change, like they use a different pitcher every game, right? Like it's basically the same type of rotation as I know when you go underhanded, it's a little bit different strain on your shoulder, but the pitching rules are essentially the same, or the pitching, customs are essentially the same. Is that about right there on that? So Cody says the star softball pitcher pitches every night. I didn't know. Yeah, but you can pitch more frequently. I didn't know that, there was a push like decades ago, like, hey, maybe baseball pitchers should also pitch underhanded because, like any orthopedist will tell you, the shoulder is not made to do this. The shoulder's not made to do that. And, part of the reason why, because there's a lot of arm injuries right now in professional baseball and people trying to figure out what to do about it. Some of this is we're just not supposed to do our shoulder this way. Shoulder moves this way, shoulder, shoulder can, kind of move this way, but this movement is just not really what the shoulder's supposed to do. So the baseball pitching motion is a very violent act on your shoulder. The softball, not quite as much. And while I don't know anything about softball, I do occasionally, when I'm with my son at the park or something like that, you see some of the young girls who are pitchers, and I'm always amazed at how fluid the movement looks like. It's just a very smooth, fluid movement. And sometimes, girls who are pretty small can actually generate a decent amount of, just because they have nice, it's almost like a golf swing or something like that. Just sometimes just the smoothness of the movement creates the action. So I think it's a fascinating sport. It's obviously grown in popularity incredibly. Not one that I know a ton about. Let me go to DawgNation.com here for a moment. Roger Hall on the subject of the walk-on thing. Yeah, I wish people pay attention to this. And, this is not even just about the whole notion of, at Georgia, we think of walk-ons as being good players because they are. But this really isn't about, oh, gosh, Georgia has good walk-ons. They can't afford to lose them. Because the Georgia situation with its walk-ons is such an outlier and compared to the rest of college football. It just is, right? It's like what Georgia does to attract, preferred walk-on type talent, it's obscene. It's an incredible collection of talent, guys who in many cases could be scholarship players other places. And Georgia obviously has a lot to sell. So in some cases it's just better, especially if you have the means to pay for your school or if you have the kind of, grades that allow you to get in-state tuition or something like that through the Zell Miller or something like that. It's just a better overall situation. It just is. This isn't about, oh, gosh, this will hurt Georgia if they lose the Dan Jacksons and the players like that who've been contributors to Georgia, Mekhi Muse and others. This, to me, is more about along the lines of the high school players that I know best are not the kinds of players who are coming to Georgia. I know a few of the guys that come to Georgia. I get to know them, get to know their families a little bit. But the high school players that I know best are typically the ones that are going to a either sort of lower Power 5 or hoping for a Group of 5 offer, some cases the FCS offer. Those are the high school players that I probably feel like I get to know best. Not the Georgia level recruits. Some of those I do, but it's the other guys. And for whatever reason, I've always had just a lot of, I don't know what the word is, like empathy or compassion, whatever, for, players. They just want that chance to play football. And what they're seeing the last couple of years is the chance they have to play football is going down and down and down. For instance, I talked to a coach, and this is a coach who coaches major college talent. But the message that he's giving to his team right now is you better make sure your grades are good, because having good grades may give you the academic scholarship opportunity to pay for your school. Now, we went from a few years ago where, like, the certain types were saying, college football players deserve more than a scholarship. All of a sudden now we're saying, well, actually there's no scholarships to be had, and now you can't even be a walk-on. Like, who's this benefiting? And once you're professional and you have a CBA, like a collective bargaining agreement, okay, well, maybe that helps the players a little bit. But here's the problem with, like, the collective bargaining agreement. In the NFL, you in theory can have a career that lasts for a long time, and the CBA could go with you for the entirety of your career. But in college, this collective bargaining agreement would be negotiated for players who are, like, in the sandbox playing with trucks right now. And all of a sudden, they arrived to a sport under a CBA that was agreed to by players when these guys were too young to even know what that was. I'm just telling you. A very small number of people have decided that it is an unavoidable reality that we're going to be on a rocket ship towards the professionalization of college football. No one seems to want to ask, is this better? What are we doing this for? Who actually asked for this other than a small handful of lawyers? Like who does this benefit and who is this for? No one else seems to be asking that question. PDT reminding us about our DawgNation 5K. Yeah, one of these days we're going to have to try to do that, PD. Now, logistically, when will that happen? I don't know. But one of these days we're going to try to do that. Roger Hall says, I don't think that Day is the guy at Ohio State. The way that he probably still talks about the Bullard hit shows that he doesn't really have what it takes. Yeah, I think there's a big difference between Jim Harbaugh and Ryan Day. I do. Harbaugh had already proven that he was a good coach. And this is the huge difference. When Harbaugh says Ryan Day was born on third base, what Jim Harbaugh means by that is that Harbaugh was in the NFL and he got to a Super Bowl. He won 44 games in 4 years. This was a winning coach before coming to Michigan, that while he got off to a little bit of a slow start at Michigan, the truth is he had some real credentials. And, even getting the 49ers job was based on a time at Stanford. Remember, when Harbaugh was at Stanford, they beat USC back when USC was the team. They were a 40-something point underdog that day, or a 40-point underdog at least. They won the game outright. Harbaugh completely resurrected Stanford, was a winner at the NFL, came to Michigan with some real coaching credentials, and eventually broke through and won a national championship. It is not obvious that Ryan Day is the same level of coach. Perhaps he's not. Now, he'll have a chance to prove this year if he is. But having more skepticism about Day than you do about Harbaugh, that's just an opinion that makes sense based on the evidence that's out there. I think you're perhaps right about that. Let's go to YouTube here for a moment. All right, over here on YouTube, Paul Moon says Harbaugh's a weird guy, but he's a very good coach. Can't argue with that. Yeah, and I think that he was doing so many weird things for a while at Michigan that I do believe that it made people forget that he is a weird coach. And look, there's a little bit of a weird thing out there about, like, some of the corny stuff, and Harbaugh is a pretty corny guy. I'm a corny guy. But here's what I can tell you. It's like corny's not cool, but your kids love it, and your family appreciates it. I think a football team sort of works the same way. It's like people get all over Dabo Swinney, for instance, because he doesn't take transfers and he doesn't do this, he doesn't do a lot of things. But you better believe the players that play for Clemson probably really appreciate that. Now, there are not enough elite players there right now to be a championship team. But the sort of corny stuff that kind of draws the ire of social media or just the regular media, I think actually probably ingratiates a coach to his players. And the Harbaugh stuff, the weird things about like not eating chicken or all this sort of strange stuff he said over the years, I'm guessing he probably related to his players okay throughout all that period, even when most of us thought he was pretty weird. The shirtless pictures and what was it, like sleeping in a treehouse, somebody's house? I mean, sometimes corny works better in a one-on-one situation than it does in kind of a mass media situation. And I'm guessing that Harbaugh probably related to his own players okay. Howard Eubanks shouting out the chance to go to Alaska on a cruise. I've never done that. I was actually thinking about that last night. You know, I'm so into the Caribbean. I just like the beach. You know, I wonder when – now, my daughter really wants to take an Alaskan cruise. She really wants to do it. I'm just so into the warm weather and the beach and the Caribbean. I wonder when I will pull the trigger on that, but I would say eventually we would do that. We have tried to set a goal for ourselves to go to every state with our kids before they get married. We're not on a very good pace with that. We were supposed to knock out, like, say, New Orleans and Texas this past winter, but obviously didn't quite make the college football playoffs. They didn't quite work out. We're going to get New York coming up later on this summer, so that's going to be a nice deal. But we were supposed to, you know, we're trying to get that done. And obviously, I think our plan is to eventually take an Alaskan cruise to sort of check that box off. Crow King's going on an Alaska cruise and leaving tomorrow. Crow King, please tell us how you enjoy it. Tell us all that you're doing there on that. I'd love to hear all about that, Crow King. Please make sure you do. Chief Jay Bowen asks, how will the SEC championship be decided if Georgia wins out and then, like, say, Alabama and Texas have the one loss? Typically, the tiebreaker for stuff like that in recent years has been your ranking. So if the two teams have the same record, if there's no head-to-head like advantage for one team over the other, then at that time you would I mean, and this is I don't know for a fact. I haven't seen the new rules, but what the previous rules were when it came to winning a division was it just came down to who had the highest overall ranking. And so that's how Georgia, for instance, went to the SEC championship in 2003. I know they used that tiebreaker to get there then, that when you got teams that have the same record, if there's no head-to-head advantage, if they have the same record against the division, at that point in time, they just sort of went to who's ranked the highest. And obviously there's no division record to even care about anymore. So my guess is something about the CFP rankings will help break those ties. And look, I think a lot of people are excited about the new format for the SEC because I think in some respects it's going to make it more interesting. But you know, as someone who follows college football pretty closely, here's what I'm going to tell you. Pac-12 and the Big 12 have had, you know, this kind of round-robin type format the last few years, the non-divisional format, I mean to say. And it gets pretty late in the season, and you really have a lot of scenarios you're sifting through in terms of how the conference championship spot's going to be decided. That may make things more interesting, but I do believe for those of us who try to follow this stuff closely, I do think to a certain extent it's going to get more complicated. I do. And that doesn't necessarily make it worse, but tiebreaker scenarios and the same stuff with the NFL playoffs where, well, if this happens and then this happens and this happens and then this happens, well, that means that this result takes place. It is going to be a more complicated conversation, so prepare yourself for that. Jonathan Aaron on the subject of Nasir Johnson saying he wanted to be a combination of Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. He says that's a monster created in a lab, like a beast. Yeah, I would say that you're right about that, Jonathan. Very good stuff. Good to see Nestor Baldazon in here. Nestor, one of our Dog Nation cruisers, says, Nestor's a great guy. He's the one that if you see the video of him celebrating after he won the Mikael Williams jersey, that's Nestor. So you've seen him before. But yeah, Odyssey of the Seas has the North Star thing, which I would imagine if you're going to like into Alaska or something like that, it's amazing. It's the big thing that sort of raises up in the air and gives you a huge view. I've never been on an Odyssey like one of those that class of ships. I've never been on a ship that has that thing, but it looks awesome on video. So Nestor, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. G. Gray says, I don't like cruises. I don't like being with the same folk for a week. Those same folk told us they don't like spending a week with you either, G. Grace. I'm kidding. I'm just giving you a hard time. G. Stick D says, I want to be one of your cruisers, but life just hasn't freed up for us yet. Well, listen, Stick, I do know how many people have very busy lives, a lot going on. So what we'll try to do is we'll try to be here for you when that happens for you. And when you are able to join us, we'd love to have you. We really would. So I appreciate that. Absolutely, we would. Johnny Surf Dog said he had a good time on an Alaskan cruise. I'm happy to hear about that. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron says, what did you get your mom and your wife for Mother's Day with all that Jimbo Fisher money? Well, can't say that yet because there's a chance they're both watching, but we do think it's going to be a fun Mother's Day. We do. I had plans for something I wanted to do. I thought it was going to be a good idea. And my son was like, this is for his grandmother, my mom. He's like, no, I don't think we should do that. That just sort of feels like something we do too frequently. I was like, what? I feel like I had all this squared away and planned out. And he has convinced me we should do something different. So there you go. Stick D says, how about a DawgNation Day of Summer at the Battery coming up? We did that a few years ago. It was great. I'd love to do that again. I don't know that we'll get that this summer, just being completely honest, but I would love to do that again soon. How about this? Mark Woodmansee says, about being on ships. He says, you need to try that on a ship for 3.5 straight years. I did that in the Navy on board the USS Nimitz. 5,700 people with the air wing. He says, crappy food and all work. That is amazing. Mark, we had Jonathan in here the other day. We showed him as part of our Golden Shoe, who was stationed on a naval vessel, not for 3.5 years, but I talked to him about that because anytime I've ever been like sightseeing or something and you go visit one of these naval vessels, I'm always amazed by how tight the confines are, the passageways, so narrow. Obviously, you have to get used to a very different, amount of personal space. So truly, I'm always grateful for those who serve our country, and especially when it comes to these, naval vessels like this, because it is just a completely different standard of living. You're absolutely right. And so you have certainly earned a lot of respect, and I'm sure the lessons that you learned from those years are things you still take with you here right now. That's an amazing story. And, of course, thank you to you for your service to our country. All right. JC also did 4 years on the ship. That's amazing. I tell you this all the time, and so I'm not a veteran, but my dad fought in Vietnam. My grandfather on my mom's side fought in Korea. My dad's dad was a World War II era veteran. I have a lot of military or armed forces service in my family's history. And so to know, and I get a chance to, and I collect, all these little coins and things that people send me. They'll send me pictures of waving the Georgia flag overseas and, all the things that I'm able to collect. The fact that so many active duty armed services or, recent vets or, people who are, kind of serving through a, perhaps in some cases, private sector overseas, things like that. The fact that so many of them have chosen to listen to our show and really kind of take our show with them as they're doing other things. Do you know what that means to me? I mean, ultimately, you sort of wonder sometimes, okay, well, the job of talking about college football, how important is that really in the grand scheme of things? Ultimately, my role as a father and a husband, more important than that. This is what I do for a living, though, and everybody wants to believe their work matters. You want to believe that the work that you're doing serves a purpose. And one of the things I've really come to believe is that part of my purpose is keeping people company as they're out doing what I think of as sort of the real work in life, serving our country through, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. We had some great folks from the Coast Guard on our DawgNation cruise. People who are truck drivers and, driving around doing things like that, or, construction workers who are, literally building the world in which we live in. So that's one of the things I've really kind of come to understand about the purpose, for this job. It's more than just talking college football. In some cases, it's allowing people to have a little bit of a connection to sort of a, more relaxed and in some cases more entertaining and enjoyable life away from the very hard work they're doing, and in some cases dangerous and work that requires incredible bravery. There is no greater privilege to me than to be able to go alongside with you in your AirPods or your headphones or whatever as you all are doing things like that. What an awesome privilege that is. So thank you very much. All right, final comments. Facebook here for a moment. Good stuff there as always. How about DawgNation.com here too? PDT says, how about a lot of Alaska talk in here today? Says that his son and new wife are on a cruise going to Alaska, going whale watching tomorrow. Yeah, see, that's one of those things. Whales are amazing, right? And the chance to see that, and that's really what the Alaskan cruises are kind of about, the experience with wildlife that you just don't get. I mean, Alaska is an amazing, amazing place. Amazing place. I haven't been there, but I'd love to go there at some point in time. SEM Dog says if college football is professionalized, it's going to lead to the end of spring training and G-Day as we know it. No more Stetson Bennett stories either. I think look, a lot of things could be different. It won't all be changes for the worse, but some of it probably will be. At least the potential of that for sure. Philip Wells and the subject of Crimson Tide. I do like that movie. And I know it's kind of, I guess sort of Bama themed, but I do like that. And that's one of those sort of great sort of 90s era movies that I just think is really good. G. Grace is shouting that out. Listen, I would say that Crimson Tide the movie is a little bit of a W for Bama fans. It is. Great scene at the beginning there when Gene Hackman's doing the thing with the crew in the rain. They do the Roll Tide thing. That if you're a Bama fan, that's a W for you. I'll give you the full credit there for that. That's a pretty strong moment. Pretty strong moment. And by the way, G. Grace also reminding us that one of our great buddies here, Green Soldier, I believe he is back stateside now. I believe. I think he's back stateside. I believe he's for the most part in civilian life these days. I think I know what he's doing for a living now. I'm not going to dox him, but I believe I know what he's doing for a living now. I think he's back stateside. But anyway, y'all have a great, great weekend. Please check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. Air conditioning units. Summer's going to be here. Stay cool and comfortable all spring and summer long. Our friends at RS Andrews can help you out with that. I was also talking to Dari this week. If you're moving to a new home, you want that inspection on that AC unit to make sure the home that you're buying has an AC unit that's going to keep you as comfortable as you need to be. Our friends at RS Andrews can help you out with that as well. So find them online, rsandrews.com. Everybody have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday. Commitment watch, perhaps. Mother's Day for sure. Georgia Diamond Dogs baseball. Wish them well against South Carolina. Georgia softball against Florida. Wish them well, too. So a lot going on. We'll see you back here Monday. Dog Nation Daily, presented by Kroger.